Hello and welcome to today's video. In today's video I'm going to be discussing what I call the dark side of Me Too. Just for context, I'm defining Me Too as any fictitious, any exaggerated allegations and focus on thereof by the media and society as a whole. Hopefully that's a good working definition for everyone. I want to talk about this because Me Too, and since Me Too, there's definitely been a cultural effect here. And I've noticed that since Me Too, because when Me Too started I was 16, I believe, and there definitely was a cultural change. So after the Me Too allegations or the Me Too movement started, we started getting assemblies where the topic was, oh, if you make a sexual joke and no one finds it funny, it's sexual harassment and that type of thing. Or approaching a woman at the gym is sexual harassment, or on the street is sexual harassment. And when I was a kid, or when I was 16, I thought, oh, this is just wokeness, this is garbage. But as I've gotten older, I've sort of realised that no mass political movement or social movement starts without a reason, and the reason it starts is normally not what the front face of the movement is. And I think it's the same for Me Too. Because the effects of Me Too, which are, it discourages men from approaching women, and it encourages or allows the police and other people responsible to ignore serious cases of human trafficking, sexual abuse, and so on. I mean, there was a recent example of this, actually, because in Leicester, it was found out that there were thousands of modern-day slaves, and no one cared. The BLM thing was on, so no one cared about the thousands of modern-day slaves. It was in the news for a week. Not even a week, I think it was in the news for a couple of days. And the chairman to the fashion companies that were using those factories stood down, and the government said, oh, we can't do anything because we're not sure which regulatory body it is who needs to deal with this. So I certainly think that is something that Me Too does, but I'm going to move on to it and talk about it specifically. So, depopulation. Me Too making men scared to approach women definitely does seem to help the depopulation agenda, because you have a whole significant section of men who have never and probably will never approach a woman first. And on top of that, you have men who will only approach a woman and half try, because if they try, it might be construed as sexual harassment. So I think that's certainly a factor, because from talking to lots of men, I know a lot of them will not approach women at bars because they think, oh, it's sexual harassment, or they've been told that a consent class is sexual harassment. And what this does in practice is it makes it less likely for someone to find a partner if they're uncomfortable talking to girls or scared of talking to girls, because that's how you meet a partner. You talk to lots of girls and you find which one you like. Obviously there are difficulties here and there are ways of getting around this fear, but I'm not going to talk about this in the video because that's not my speciality. But I definitely think it's not a coincidence that on university campuses, where a significant number of young people are, there is this image that, oh, anybody trying to hit on a woman or hitting on a woman, or at least there's the perception that it's sexual harassment. And I think that certainly is a factor and I think that certainly does help the depopulation agenda, because if people take longer to find a partner, we'll exclude the money side of things and the inaffordability of having children these days. But if someone struggles to find a partner because they only approach like one girl a year, and the same for girls, because what I've noticed is I know some very hot women and they don't get approached anymore. So I definitely think that is because what's going to happen is people will actually have children older because it takes them longer to find a partner. Obviously there are other factors to people having children older, but I think Me Too certainly does exacerbate that problem. And generally stopping people from or encouraging people not to approach women is generally a bad idea, because there is quite a specific line between a clumsy approach and sexual harassment, but let's be honest, most bars these days will not tolerate someone sexually harassing you, and it's a case of saying no. I mean, we've seen this video going around recently of the gym woman who was videoing herself and said that she was being harassed. I mean, if you feel like you're being harassed all the time when someone's looking at you or glancing in your direction, you have a problem and you probably need to get professional help. But the issue, I would say, for the depopulation, or these people who have mental health issues, are dictating policy. And I can't help but think that this is deliberate, because most of these people who squeal about sexual harassment and make videos, they don't really have any institutional power. So I remember I was at a consent class and I had this fat feminist, she was like 20 stone, saying that, oh, she gets approached all the time and it makes her feel unsafe. First of all, that's bullshit. That is bullshit. A 20 stone feminist is not getting approached all the time. I mean, I know a couple of very attractive ballet dancers and they get approached like once a month, if that. So I think it's interesting to listen to people who are predicate this stuff and are big into everything's sexual harassment, because they're either usually doing it for attention or they're doing it because they want to feel like that is the case. Because I think it's very dishonest to say that hot women get approached all the time. I mean, I do understand that there are some women who get lots of dick pics, but there are things you can do about that, and there are ways of mitigating that. But generally, I think having a Me Too culture where that image does exist is really important if you're supporting depopulation. What the Me Too movement does, or Me Too type things, is they focus public attention and police attention on minor issues or issues that are exaggerated or completely fictitious. When I first started uni, in my first year, there was apparently a spiking epidemic. And 1 in 3 people at one point or 1 in 3 women were saying they'd been spiked. Obviously, this wasn't the case. Obviously, it wasn't the case. Because if you've got 1 in 3 people or 1 in 3 women being spiked by injection, bear in mind there are about 10 to 15,000 university students at my uni, you would have had multiple deaths. Because the needles aren't sterile, you could contract HIV, you could get too much of a certain drug. I mean, people being spiked generally isn't that common, because nightclubs and bars do a lot to make sure that it doesn't happen. I mean, most nightclubs I've been to, I don't go nightclubbing that often because I'm epileptic and I hate it. There's normally a ratio of between 1 to 10 and 1 to 20, just depending on the size of a venue. So it really depends. It's very unlikely for you to A, sneak it in these days, and B, be able to get away with it because there's CCTV. Obviously there'll be the outliers and the examples, but it happens, but not very often. Back to my university story, there was 1 confirmed case of someone being spiked, and you had hundreds of people saying they'd been spiked to the staff, and then thousands more who were just saying it among their friends. What this did was this created a lot of work for the police, because the police were trying to investigate it, getting things off bars, CCTV off bars and that type of thing, and sending undercover agents in, or undercover police officers or plainclothes police officers into bars to keep an eye on things. And it was a massive waste of resources, because it wasn't an issue. 1 person had that happen to them. What I also want to get at is, it isn't really Me Too, but I spoke about this briefly and I'll speak about it again. What seems to happen with the Me Too stuff is it seems to make it very easy to scapegoat people who are perhaps guilty, perhaps not, for whatever reason. So we saw this with Harvey Weinstein. And it's well known that Hollywood has a very sexually disgusting culture, and that there is a standard of behaviour in Hollywood and sexual misconduct and deviancy that would make anybody blush. And apparently it's a cultural thing, so there are people who have got away with stuff in Hollywood, or apparently have done, but it's something that is a massive problem, and I believe it is a massive problem in Hollywood. However, when the Me Too movement started, it focused on Harvey Weinstein, which, by the sounds of things, Harvey Weinstein was not the worst of the worst, or nowhere near. Apart from Kevin Spacey, but Kevin Spacey, as I remember, was acquitted of charges. No one else had their collar felt, and it's the same for the Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein thing. Ghislaine Maxwell, thrown away in prison. Jeffrey Epstein dies. Case closed. Also, Prince Andrew pays millions upon millions in damages, or in a out-of-court settlement. But no one else who was on that list or on the islands got their collar felt. You had one victim, and the one victim, or one high-profile victim, gets lots of money and is accusing the likes of Prince Andrew of doing stuff that is not necessarily acceptable or tame, but from everything else that had been alleged was on the lower end. So the one who sued Prince Andrew for 10 mil, I forget her name, she was a child or someone who was quite young, a young person. I can't remember how old she was when she started working for Jeffrey Epstein, and apparently, according to her, Jeffrey Epstein would occasionally get hit to give him massages and maybe touch his balls, and that's awful. That shouldn't happen. However, given the other stuff that has been mentioned in that case or associated with that case, it's the minor end of the allegations, or the lower end of the allegations. And because these people were scapegoated, and rightly so, because Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were criminals and were involved, the media narrative and the publicly acceptable narrative is that Ghislaine Maxwell was procuring girls for Jeffrey Epstein, which, looking at his lists and who's been on his jet, is extremely unlikely. Thank you very much for watching. Please, if you want to improve your public speaking skills, check out my Locals channel or my Substack, and have a nice evening.